The race is on, and can George Russell get his title bid back on track, or is Kimi Antonelli now the firm favourite for the title? Might Lando Norris be a factor given McLaren's revival, and what are the implications of the FIA's plan for a V8 engine future? I'm Edd Straw, and joining me to answer those questions, and many others from our listeners, are John Noble and Scott Mitchell-Malm. Well, we're here still in Miami, hence the slightly unusual backgrounds. We just want to have a little bit more time in Miami, didn't we?
Well, it's nice not to rush home after a Grand Prix. That always adds a little bit of extra stress, especially when you're trying to work for everything. But yeah, on this occasion, it's given us an opportunity to actually record a podcast that isn't the post-race podcast together in reasonable spirits and health on a Grand Prix Monday, which isn't always a given. So yeah, I'm happy that we've done this.
I'm still loving the new race start yesterday, 3 hours earlier, and I was thinking when we got to bed. Just gone 11 o'clock last night. I was thinking this would be 2-3 o'clock in the morning, and then we would still have to get up at the same time, so 6-7 o'clock to catch European Day. That would have made a terrible day today.
It makes so much difference. That's the amazing thing. I can honestly say that I feel about 3 times more alive than I normally do on a post-Grand Prix week. So I'm very positive about that. But we've got loads of questions from you, from the Race Members Club. These all came from our questions from the Miami Grand Prix. And we thought we'd work through some today. And there's plenty about George Russell. And we're going to start off, Scott, with a combination question from Motorsport Mike and Matthew McMahon. Is Montreal George's last chance to show he can be a title contender? And what do you reckon is Russell's morale heading into Canada?
It's not the last chance. The season's too long for what will be. I always lose track now that we've lost Bahrain and Saudi. It'll be round
22.
Yeah.
22 minus 4?
No, there's 22 races. That'll be round 5. It's too early in the season for it to be the last chance. But in terms of wresting the momentum back from Kimi Antonelli, I think Canada is an important weekend because we're coming from a race here where Antonelli was really strong in 2025. He was very quick last year, and Russell got on top of him by the end of that weekend in terms of race pace, but it still wasn't stunning. And he's just been, he was second best in Miami this year comfortably to a circuit where Russell has had the upper hand, not just on Antonelli, but he's always fared very well in Montreal versus Lewis Hamilton when they were teammates at Mercedes. He obviously got a win there last year. He should have, it was a couple of years before that where there was an opportunity to do a lot better. The car was quick, he was quick, and he just slightly underachieved. So it's a track he's gone well at. So just in terms of getting things back on track, it's a very important weekend because there's another scenario where these opening weekends play out just a fraction differently. Russell and Antonelli come to Miami. Antonelli is better. Russell does have a defeat there, but he still has a small championship lead because China and Japan have gone more normally than they actually did from his perspective. So I don't think it's a crisis. It's more just Miami's exposed that there are weaknesses in like there are for all drivers. There are weaknesses that can put him behind and on the back foot. He now goes to a track that he knows everything should flow a little bit better, more naturally anyway. He can't just rely on that, but he does have to make the most of that because otherwise, as he's admitted, the momentum that is with Antonelli will just keep building.
Yeah, I think he can stay calm for now. China, Japan, in his head, I think the job he did was fine. Minor change of circumstances, he wins those races. Things turn around. He can accept the defeat here if those events have been fine. So in theory, he doesn't need to change anything to be in this position. But I think you're right. The significance of Canada isn't the points gap. The significance is it's a track he's gone well at. With the upgrades coming, it will set the tone for who best adapts to whatever this new Mercedes becomes, and that's why he needs to have a good result there.
Yeah, and it's still a long season, so there's plenty of time. If Canada doesn't go well, the bottom line is then the next race, where's that, Monaco, then becomes really important, doesn't it? There's enough time. We're still in the shaping phase of the season, but yeah, certainly Russell will, in his mind, be saying, right, I've got to go there and win.
Plus, it was a bit of a flippant comment in the middle of the weekend, but one of the thought that did occur to me during Miami, I think with that probably early in the race on Sunday, if not after qualifying, felt a little bit like Russell's decided to have his kind of Oscar Piastri moment quite early in the season because there was a bit of a vibe through Miami of what happened to Piastri last year when that battle with Lando Norris started to really swing away from him, where it's not just narrow defeats, it's not just circumstances, it's just you've just been absolutely obliterated on pace, like by several tenths of a second, not just by much. And if you have that too much, too often as the season goes on, he will be he'll be too far behind, to be able to catch up. But also, you don't want to have a situation like Piastri had last year, where it all seems to be going really nicely, and then you have a setback and you lose out at the end anyway. The point is that if you have weekends where you drop points, that will happen several times over the year. But if you get battered on a weekend, and that happens more often than not, or even just enough, then you lose points not only to your teammate, but other cars nip in as well. And that's what happened in Miami, because Mercedes didn't have the advantage. Other cars got in Japan too, and that's kind of what he can't afford. So yeah, there's plenty of time to go, but doesn't mean you can just throw points away, especially when it's not just 3 points, 7 points, whatever it is, when you're finishing directly behind your immediate opposition.
Yeah, points scored in the early part of the season are worth the same as those at the end, even if they feel less portentous and important because you don't have the same context. The next question, Don, is related to that, so we'll go to that from Mr. Ice Cold Andy, 23, who says, if Russell continues to get beaten by Antonelli, will Mercedes begin to put all their eggs in Kimi's basket, similar to the Leclerc-Vettel situation?
No, they won't. I think Mercedes and Toto Wolff have always been adamant that we will treat them equally. You can argue, has he had some favourites in the past? There is that personal link with Antonelli, having seen him come through. But equally, there was a personal link with George Russell, junior driver. So either winning the championship would be good for them. Toto knows how to handle championship fights. I think the only scenario where he would favour one over the other would be if there was a pretty big gap between them and someone was coming rapidly down behind and needed to protect them. So it will be a tactical... He'd only do it if it was a tactical move to protect the team being beat at the championship. I don't think they would do it at all if it's the pair of them battling it out.
The only thing that they will have to be wary of is there will be an external narrative, whether that's among fans, whether that's among parts of the media, whatever, that something similar to what happened at McLaren will break out at some point, which isn't the two of them necessarily driving into each other or managing that. It will be the interpretation, the assumption, the implication that Mercedes has a preference, because at McLaren, it was that Lando Norris had been McLaren's driver for a long time. He had a very close relationship and has a very close relationship with McLaren Racing CEO Zak Brown. He's kind of the favoured son. At Mercedes, it's actually the other way round. The incumbent driver, while still a Mercedes driver in the long term, isn't the one that has been taken under the wing of the team boss in quite the same way. So you will have some people, I'm sure, look at it and say Mercedes would definitely prefer to have Antonelli be world champion than Russell, because they took the big punt on him after Lewis Hamilton. This will prove all the critics wrong and stuff like that. That opinion will build at some point of the season if it doesn't exist among people already. So Mercedes does have to be just a little bit conscious of how to handle that.
And you have to remember, though, that it's all about the long-term trends you need to look at. That situation with Vettel and Leclerc, first and foremost, it was because Leclerc was performing better over a sustained period compared to Vettel, not 3 or 4 races. And that's what does it. Now, it may be that that's what's happening, but Antonelli will have to keep building on that for that to happen. And you have to be really careful about the sample size here, because we could have seen Antonelli's best 3 weekends of the year. We could have seen Russell's best 3 weekends of the year, and it's going to get even worse. Anything can happen from this point, so you need to keep that in mind. And there is such a thing as the centre of gravity in a team, and drivers are cognizant of that. But we have to be careful about overreacting, because there were points last season when people were saying, Piastri's got the championship, Norris is going to leave, it's all done, he's the number one forever. And of course, that wasn't the full story, was it? So I'm sitting here thinking, well, there's some interesting things here. Antonelli's done himself no end of good. And it could be the start of that, but there's nowhere near enough data and time. We need a good chunk of races and kind of the whole season to play out to decide if it is that sort of situation.
I remember in 2024 when Lando was battling with Max and McLaren was adamant, we're going to keep things equal between the drivers. Remember at Monza, they were both gunning for the win. You could question whether... We were questioning why McLaren hasn't thrown all its weight behind Lando at this phase, but McLaren was adamant. Then there was a short phase where they said to Oscar, okay, you are now supporting Lando, you're backing up, and then it was pulled again, and then it kept them all equal. So these things vary. I think it's based on pragmatic decisions. And Mercedes, this isn't Mercedes' first rodeo. They've been in this scenario before. They've had drivers battling as far as they can for the championship, like Rosberg and Hamilton. They've had more equal, more kind of easier runs to titles with Bottas and Hamilton. They know what they're doing.
There's a question again related to this that we'll move on to that I'll take from Adam Smith, who says, how much longer will the current status quo need to continue before the best behind Verstappen tag attached to Russell is eroded? Well, I think last year we had Russell second in our top 10, if memory serves, I think. But I would say the best behind Verstappen thing, I don't think it's clear-cut Russell. I think there's a group of sort of Russell, Norris, Leclerc and sort of Piastri in there as well. So I don't think, and of course Hamilton, we've yet to see exactly where his level settles out, but he can't be discounted. But
this season, just to be very, very clear, that you're not saying that we've not seen Lewis Hamilton's level settle out overall.
I need more data, Scott. More data. It's not enough. No. What this is for Russell is, I always say, in your racing career, every time you step up, there's new challenges, and that's often new categories. But you come into a category, you fight for points, podiums, wins, titles, then you step up categories. And the final step is that F1 World Championship fighting and showing you can do that week in, week out. That's the exam that George Russell is currently sitting, and how he stands up to it over a good number of races, not just a small number where bits of misfortune and this, that and the other can, or just the odd bad track can distort it. That will decide where he shakes out. And I don't think we know definitely the answer. He could be that driver, or he could, as we've seen before, be found wanting, because either he doesn't have the necessary psychology, or there's just a few skills that are exposed that you don't necessarily notice when they're not fighting right at the front. So that's the process we're going through. Absolutely no. I mean, if every weekend's in Miami, then yeah, his stock's going to plummet.
Well, just to take your analogy that little bit further, like the exam is a season-long one, and he got off to a very good start to it in Australia, but he's just had a couple of questions that have just, left him sort of. It's been a bit harder to answer them than he would have liked, but what we don't know is whether or not what we don't know is if he's going to keep getting wrong answers or just lacking a bit of confidence, whatever, or if it's just going to be a bunch of correct answers to the end of the season, and therefore he passes with flying colours. Because the issue that I see beyond the pace in Miami, for example, is, as Russell admitted in the gap between Japan and Miami, there were a couple of things he needed to tidy up, and that didn't just go for kind of the way Mercedes was managing things. Like some of the start issues, for example, have been on the team side in terms of grip targets or what they've instructed the driver to do. But there have also been moments like in Miami at the safety car restart there, that one was on Russell, and he sort of came over the radio, didn't he, and said basically keep an eye on it, because he was implying that the team should have clocked that he wasn't in the right mode or whatever, and told him, but be in the right mode if that is the issue that you face. So there are. It's
really simple, isn't it? Sometimes it's just, it really is at this level, do it better.
Yeah, exactly. And it sounds a bit flippant or harsh or whatever, but that's what I mean by and it's not basically. This exam he's trying to pass isn't a case of you have to get every single question right. There are one or two that he's got wrong so far, but that doesn't matter if he does more than enough right until the end of the season to get his passing grade, or however you mark this test. How do you mark the World Championship test beyond? It's pass-fail, basically, isn't it?
It's pass-fail in that regard, but of course the real definitive thing, and what everybody looks to, the drivers and posterity, it's the races, ranking of the drivers at the end of the season. That's the thing that obviously really matters. So.
But it's also that they're not static, and I think last year's the classic example of why you can't judge where the ranking is or how you're going to do in your exam based on a tiny snapshot. Because last year, Piastri, Norris, we understood their strengths and weaknesses, and there are various phases of that championship. Norris had an era where he was fantastic. Piastri had an era where he was going very strong. Then things would flip around. Then you'd have the impact of events like Monza, for example, and then where that put Piastri in his head in Baku. All these things can play out. And these are the same drivers taking in effectively the same exam, but on the day, part one of the exam has gone better because circumstances have gone for you. Another day it's not gone so well. So I don't think just because we've had 4 races and this is where things are stack up, anything's defined and decided. Things can change, and this is the joy of Formula One, because if we did know that this is the way things are going, we've got 18 races to not watch anything.
It's the best thing about sport is that the situation can change quite quickly, and it does come down to who executes best on the day. Because coming back to that original question about being best behind Verstappen or whatever, and I know this isn't the intent of the question, but when you do look at it like that, it implies the existence of a really, really easily quantifiable hierarchy at the end of it. And look, we do the rankings at the end of the season, and that is us trying to do that. But it doesn't mean at the end of the year, unlike when you're in, I don't know, an F1 racing game thing where there is literally an overall attributes given to the drivers. That's not how it works. So what you might have at the moment is Verstappen might be just that little bit over the course of everything better than the next group of drivers. But that next group of drivers, who's the best of that group, can change weekend to weekend, and therefore over the course of the whole season, because there's probably 4 or 5 drivers that are absolutely microscopically different in terms of their overall output. If you put them in their ideal versions of race cars and race teams, whatever, they'd go around and they'd be damn near inseparable in terms of lap time, right? But how they execute one weekend to the next, how comfortable they are, how they deal with the mental challenge of it all, the stresses, how you bounce back from adversity, how much you believe in momentum, how much you think you can actually turn the tables if things are going against you, just how fast you are, how adaptable you are, whatever, over the course of the season. That's what I mean, that group can then end up being decided upon very differently because of the job they've done that year, not because of how outright good they are as racing drivers. And when you see it in a World Championship battle, which is what Russell and Antonelli are in at the moment, both of them are clearly extremely, extremely talented drivers. Charles Leclerc's extremely talented. Oscar Piastri is extremely talented. They aren't world champions yet. They could be. Piastri damn near was last year, but it doesn't mean that it's you are or you aren't the best driver after Verstappen just because, last year you did really well, this year not so well. Russell could do a worse job this year overall and still be world champion. Like it's the way it goes based on your machinery and your opposition.
The key thing I think for Russell is he needs to avoid convincing himself that Antonelli's the chosen one at Mercedes, because that can easily become a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's like I say, performance, delivery is what dictates it. Mercedes can't load the dice so that Antonelli is better over a long period of time. That doesn't really happen. One or the other will have the advantage, or they'll end up roughly even going back and forth. That's what happens. But John, do you think there's a risk Russell could talk himself into defeat? I think he's probably robust enough, but that's a danger, isn't it?
It's a definite danger, and I reckon if you, in a couple of years' time, when we sit down with Oscar Piastri and reflect on 24, was this the one chance that got away from him? Is he
25, presumably?
25, sorry, yes. Is this the one chance that got away from him? Are we 2-3 years down the road and he's got 2 world championships in the bag? But as he reflects on that season, I would love to know if post Monza, just the things playing around in his head, that mindset that he approached Baku with that led to the derailed weekend, and just those elements and what's going on in your head, they can have an influence. Whereas what George needs to do, and there was small hints of it after Suzuka, but not a great deal about things not going my way and things outside my control, is just keep doing what he's done to get to the front in Formula One, because he knows he can do it. He's got the skills and the talent. Miami didn't go his way, but it's a track he's not especially liked. He made some progress in the final stage of the race. He calmed down the sliding a little bit, and the pace unlocked, and the tyre form got better, adjusted a few settings. So there's always improvements to be made, but he needs to just keep focusing on the job in hand, not let these ghosts interfere if things don't go his way. Because just as things swung between Lando and Oscar last year, I'm convinced they're going to swing backwards and forwards between these two over this season.
The bottom line is it'll be decided with performance. And if Antonelli beats Russell and he outperforms him over the year, that's because Antonelli has been better.
He's done a great job this season. Absolutely knuckled down, got on top of these regulations, got on top of the deployment strategies, the understanding, hasn't been punished too much by the mistakes, lost some points in the sprint, but starts, for example, he's still got a lot of work to do. But there are areas he's made a big jump from last year. Outlaps, for example, an area he was struggling with last year, proved absolutely critical in Miami. That superb outlap. The pass on Lando was critical to delivering that win. So it's about working out where your weaknesses are, addressing them, improving on them, and delivering.
Well, more questions now. We're moving on to the other Mercedes driver, Kimi Antonelli. Now, Scott, Jordan Key says, do you think Antonelli is now title favourite? And do you think Norris can claw back and mount a challenge too if McLaren keeps developing the car like they do? And Shrinkinator asks if it's time to rethink Russell's status as title favourite. And before I let you actually answer, I'll tell you what the actual odds are, because I just thought that would be useful.
Oh, wait, hang on, because I've got quite a potentially I don't want to say boring answer to this, but I don't want it to sound like I've copied the odds. So can I very quickly say my answer? Yeah?
Okay, you give an answer and we'll see what the market says.
I think the most interesting element about it, because I do think this is genuinely interesting, not boring, I don't think there is one. I think it's properly neck and neck between them now after this, because momentum says Antonelli's the favourite, but actually it's too early in the season too. The main thing for me is that he looks genuinely like he can win this World Championship, and that's absolutely mega for the season. Am I... How does it work? How does it look?
Well, the market, and this is based on, I think it's a sample of 24 bookmakers. I checked the top 8 favourites. Does have Antonelli now favourite.
Ooh.
The implied probability.
By much, though.
An amount. It sounds a bit bigger than it.
Thanks, Ed.
Yeah, right.
Correct. It is an amount.
There is a number. No, the implied probability you can work out has Antonelli at 44.69%. This is based on 24 bookmakers, and it's just a good way of doing it. George Russell, his implied probability is 30.6%. That's not actually a massive difference, but it does show Antonelli's moved ahead, and that's really because of recent results.
And is there a shift towards Norris potentially coming into the picture then, which links to the second part of that question?
Yeah, Norris at 20.7% now, so he's certainly risen, and these will be quite volatile because that betting market reacts quite dramatically to goings on. But
I think that fits with reality though, and obviously it will be, there'll be a reasonable amount of statistical relevance in terms of how that's put together. It's not just plucked from nowhere,
and it reflects the money that's being staked, etc. But it's still pretty close in terms of that gap isn't that difference. If you look at I'm not saying do this because I don't think Formula One's necessarily the ideal thing to bet on because it's not super variable, but they'd be pretty close in terms of you look at them. They're not quite joint favourites, but yeah, it's a slender difference.
Yeah, I would say that is. It's not, like I say, it's not what I think. I wouldn't be able to pick between the two Mercedes drivers right now to be world champion. It's too early. I think we've seen very, very, very strong peaks from both of them now. I would say that Antonelli has probably exceeded my expectations at the start of the year. And if you think that, given where they are in terms of experience, Antonelli should and almost certainly is, unless he's done an awful lot of learning in 15 months, be a lot earlier on the curve, so therefore there is more progress to be made. But I think Norris coming into the picture on the evidence of the Miami weekend, given what McLaren was also able to do in Japan, where it used the engine advantage to become best of the rest behind Mercedes, but then could have won the race there anyway, even though its car wasn't quite as advanced as it is now. I think discounting McLaren at this point would be foolish, because there's decent evidence, I think, that McLaren can do this over the course of the season, and maybe like Ferrari, for example, won't stay with them. I'm a bit disappointed with Ferrari in terms of kind of just this trend we're seeing over the course of a Grand Prix, for example. Red Bull looks like it's sort of back in the mix again on the evidence of Miami, but it's one race, so we need to see how well that upgrade works. McLaren I have a bit more faith in because of the development trajectory of recent years, the way that its season has been a gentle kind of improvement weekend by weekend, and you look back to where they were at pre-season, we were saying they might only be fourth best right now, but then there will be progress. Didn't even get to do the race in China. There's logic to what we're seeing with McLaren. It hasn't been circuit specific or circumstance specific or anything like that. There was good progress chipping away at the engine learnings to start with. Now there's been a really good car upgrade. There's more car stuff coming. So I think neck and neck between the Mercedes drivers, and it's on either of them to try and take the edge in their own battle. But the fascinating thing about that, if they keep trading, wins or who's going to be fastest, which I think is what will happen over the next few races, I don't envisage either driver really sort of going on a prolonged run. It's Antonelli's chance to do that, obviously. I think if they keep taking points off each other, I think sooner or later, a McLaren, probably decent chance that it's either Norris or Piastri, because it was Piastri in Japan, but I think McLarens will start winning races, and that's where, if you're Mercedes, you're going to be thinking, oh, do we need to make lives easy? Would it be easier for us if we only had one driver doing this? But that's probably not going to be the case, even though it's been Antonelli on this recent run.
I think the important transformation this year is that Antonelli has gone from someone I didn't come into the season believing he had what it would take to win this championship. That too young in the career, the inexperience. And even Toto Wolff after China was absolutely adamant on Sunday night when we spoke to him after that victory, saying, no, Kimi hasn't got the maturity and the experience, and going up against George to win this championship, there's going to be more mistakes. We have to understand where he is and play everything down. But we leave Miami absolutely no doubt that Kimi has what it takes to win this championship. But it's not done. It's far from done. George has everything he needs to get back in this. And the McLarens, I think Scott's right. What we saw in Miami is kind of a warning shot of what's to come, because I think they're making rapid progress in terms of the power unit understanding. They've been quite smart in some deployment strategies that have caught Mercedes out and were critical to that sprint performance. And they've got more upgrades to come in the next race as well. I think Canada's going to be fascinating.
But we obviously have the opportunity to see what Mercedes will do in the development war. We also need to start seeing McLaren actually convert it, because having the potential is great, but there's a points deficit there. So you're not going to start catching Mercedes just by almost beating them. They actually have to do it. And just one point on Antonelli quickly, just to follow up what John was saying. I think this is a little bit what you said about Piastri 12 months ago. Obviously, slightly different phases. I think Antonelli has started this season. At China onwards, Antonelli, because I think Australia was about kind of what I thought it would be. China has been like third year Antonelli, I would say. China, Japan, and especially Miami. That kind of to do it weekend in, weekend out, beat Russell. I mean, he still needs to be more robust. Like, there are little mistakes kind of here and there. But in terms of the speed, the execution when it matters in qualifying, for example, the fact that he's winning the races, this is kind of, I think he's not, it's not like he's a year ahead of schedule. I don't want it to be taken that way, but it's like, if he keeps doing this, then this is world champion level driving. Of course it is. And it's something I didn't expect to see from him until year 3. I thought we'd see peaks this year, but too many sort of missed opportunities and rough edge moments. And we might still see that because they've only had 4 races. But I think to have had the ratio of strong, robust performances to raw potential is there, but it needs to be refined, has been fantastic for the races we've seen so far.
And John, related to those rough edges, Chuck Aoki says, will Kimi Antonelli ever figure those race starts out? Or is he simply channeling his 1993 Prost and the car advantage means they don't matter? Prost, of course, had all sorts of troubles with the clutch on that Williams.
Well, they're actually different problems each time. So while from the outside it looks like there is a consistent problem here and a failure, be it from the team or Kimi himself, actually everything along the way has been different. Australia, Mercedes was caught out by the harvesting restrictions on the formation lap. So it basically meant that Kimi and George had got 3/4 way around the lap and had hit the recharge limit and then couldn't deploy any battery to do burnouts because they knew then they couldn't recharge it. So they arrived on the grid as super cold tyres, which isn't what you want for the start. So that was Australia. China was, I think to counter it, they tried an alternative battery strategy in the sprint, which then had the other extreme of having no battery on the grid. So they've got that all sorted. Then in Japan, it was a Kimi mistake. He released the clutch too much from what he'd been told to do and target for grip. That was too much wheel spin and he lost out there. Miami this weekend has been, he hit the target that Mercedes gave him, so it did a better job than Japan, but the target was wrong. There wasn't enough grip. The calculations were out. Mercedes practice starts had been done from pole position and Kimi had started in second. Kimi also hadn't done a practice start after P1 because it had a power unit problem. So it'd been a little bit blind about the start processes going into the race. So that was the Saturday sprint problem. Sunday wasn't too bad. It wasn't great. It was probably the best one of the best starts Mercedes has made. So it's different problems each time. Yes, they've got to work on it and solve it, but I don't think there's a singular crisis they can't get on top of. It's just chipping away and doing a great job. And because the level of perfection at the front of Formula One is just astounding.
I would say actually the thing that, if there was anything that worried me about Antonelli's starts, it was the way he then handled the kind of run into turn one, because I think getting suckered into the go deep and lock up, I mean, Max Verstappen made the same mistake, so you could argue that a 4-time world champion with his experience did it, but that's also because Max doesn't like to yield, and that's one of Max's few traits that young drivers shouldn't want to emulate. They should want to be a bit kind of calmer in those circumstances. So I think, you know, it's only a one-off. There's no trend necessarily there to say, oh, Antonelli's bad with those moments and judgments, but that's the sort of thing I think, rather than a start that can be explained by, you know, the stuff John's saying, where it's not in his control necessarily, it's sort of a broader team execution. That's the sort of thing where Antonelli needs to come away from that weekend and go, I need to not do that, because that is something you might be able to get away with, but that could equally have been a terrible flat spot, and then something that he carried with him for the whole first stint, lost a load of ground and didn't win the race because of it. So that's the sort of thing, it's in his control more directly than the launch itself, which is often the more headline grabbing thing, although locking up and going into the runoff is obviously also very obvious to people.
And then another Antonelli related question from Bob that I'll take. Do you see Kimi Antonelli's season going the same as Piastri's in 2025? An amazing 3 quarters of the season, looking like the title favourite, but then the inevitable collapse as the pressure mounts. I mean, it could go that way. I would say there was a bit, I don't think it was actually pressure. I think the first thing was actually the nature of the circuits and the grip levels. And actually, interestingly, it's that lower grip, it's the Miamis, the Mexicos, the Brazils that Piastri struggled more with. Actually, Russell can struggle a bit more with as well. So I actually don't think the pressure was the first order thing with Piastri, because there's a weird distribution of circuit characteristics actually on the F1 calendar now. So you have to have that in mind. But Antonelli could get into a really strong position and then struggle. And sometimes it's not pressure. Sometimes it's just experience and that data you've got in the mind, all that previous experience to lean on. And sometimes it's a little bit of how to deal with it. And pressure is one of those things that's used a lot when talking about sport. And it is a thing, but often everything gets kind of lumped under pressure. But put it this way, if Antonelli does lead the World Championship from here all the way until October and then starts to get shaky, wouldn't completely surprise me. It would be possible, but then we'd have to look into, well, what exactly has happened here?
There's something about the Piastri comparison that I hadn't thought of until kind of this weekend when we were sort of looking at it through the lens of what Russell was struggling with, that made me think this could potentially be in Russell's favour for those circuits where he isn't quite as happy. One, it might simply not be as pronounced as what Piastri was dealing with.
Well, he has won in Brazil, hasn't he?
Well, 2, I think Russell's more likely to kind of just get on with it as best he can, and I suspect Mercedes is more likely to kind of let him do that. And if that just means being a bit off that weekend and trying to make the best of it, that's kind of what he'll be. I think, in hindsight, what Piastri might not regret about the end of last year, but what maybe was a bigger factor than we thought at the time or realised at the time, was maybe a little bit of a repeat of the Daniel Ricciardo's, which is where McLaren, in an effort to be helpful and constructive, is maybe trying to be a bit too clever and is trying to over-engineer things and tries to break things down way too much. Because with Ricciardo, I think more damage was done than good in the end by trying to completely recalibrate Ricciardo's driving style for what the car needed in those moments. And I do wonder if we could go back to those circuits at the back end of last year where Piastri would have really bad moments, like Mexico, for example. I wonder if there was a degree of trying to just kind of sort of paint by numbers driving in terms of this is what you need to do, so stop trying to drive your way and try and drive this way. And then that actually puts you further away because it's so unnatural, because obviously Mexico, it's worse than Austin, but was much more pronounced than Austin. And then there were some other tracks where, he goes to Qatar where it's much more suited to him and he drives completely naturally and it all comes back again because it also suits him. If that is a factor, because that is literally just something that came to my mind in Miami when I was comparing it in my own head to where Russell is now. If that's the sort of thing that can be a factor, I suspect that the way Russell and Mercedes go about things means he won't fall into that potential trap.
I think we should say as well, there'll be moments, John, you referred to Monza, and probably the one area where I don't know if it's pressure getting to him, but Piastri admitted he was overdriving a bit in Baku. And actually, I think Baku was the most significant weekend because he made that combination of a terrible start and a jump start. And he was definitely right, I'm going to make up all these places. And he put his car in a stupid place around the outside, ended up in the wall. And those weekends are really important because when things are going badly or maybe you're not quite in the right place mentally, you need to come away with those results. You need to make sure you're not in the wall. And that's going to be important for both Antonelli and Russell, in fact, that when you do have bad weekends or you are coming off a run that's difficult, that you all you do is focus on your process. Because like in Piastri's case, you're at the back, you've messed it up. It's not good. All you can do now is drive the right race to get to the best possible position. You don't try and get too grabby and mess it up and sort of gain it all in one go and hit the wall. And that's a real test. And that was probably the biggest crack for Piastri. And any title contender gets tested. There's so many of those holes you are invited to plunge headfirst into.
I'm quite curious to see how Russell deals with it, actually, because obviously Antonelli's had his own problems to get through in his rookie season. Even before he was an F1 driver, he had to work out how to come back from the pressure and the low point of that crash at Monza in his FP1 outing. But Russell has had a little bit of a tendency through his Mercedes career just getting kind of tempted into those Hail Mary moments where he thinks, if I do this, there's a much bigger result on the cards here. And that's often been kind of not justified, because it maybe makes it sound like it's an excuse, but it's often been explained by Russell and Mercedes as being a function of the fact that the car can't win regularly in normal situations. So when there is an extra variable like it rains and there's a chance to either be on slicks when it's drying or something like that, Russell's kind of been at the front of the queue to go, I'm willing to do that. And he just, if there are moments where he's chasing it with Antonelli, if he senses an opportunity, that's where I think that could be his biggest moment, to just be like, stay calm, focus on what you can control here, don't overreach trying to sort of pull a rabbit out of the hat or anything like this. It'd be very, very interesting to see what challenges both drivers face this year, because it's all well and good, and the Piastri example is a great one for people to latch onto, to get suckered into thinking about recent things that have happened and just assuming that those exact challenges or narratives will be revived, but in the Mercedes context this year, they will face their own challenges, and that's what's going to be super interesting to watch.
Well, on to our final batch of questions. And just as a reminder, if you want to join the question asking fun, we take questions after every Grand Prix, and we normally take some of the ones that aren't necessarily so immediate and try and address them either on this podcast, or sometimes we do F1 Extra for the Race Members Club. You will need to be in the Race Members Club. If you hit the link in the episode description or head to Patreon and search for the Race or the Race Members Club, you'll be able to find out more. Loads of extra content. Our bonus In-Car Insights podcasts that are very popular from Grand Prix. We do book club, film club. There's a thriving community full of great people, like-minded enthusiasts there. So if you're not part of it, we'd love you to join us. And the first question for the final part, Scott, comes from Christopher Partridge, who actually has said, hi, Ed, Scott and John. So he's got the lineup right for this podcast as well.
Superb work. Hello.
If MBS does indeed reintroduce V8s by 2030, what impact do you think this will have on the automotive industry, as F1 tech often works its way through, e.g. energy recuperation? Do you think it could stall the progress of electric cars as a whole?
That's obviously Mohammed Ben Sulayem, the FIA president. I mean, that's is that potentially giving F1 a bit too much credit in terms of the impact it can have with the wider world?
Probably, yeah. I don't think the automotive industry is going to look at that and think, oh, we better go this way.
Yeah, I think it's less that, and it's more about kind of F1 probably trying to pick the right trends and just make sure that it's not. I don't know. I think in hindsight, whether it was desperation to have the manufacturers, whether there was a legitimate need to guarantee that you had them on board or not, only the people in the room will really know. But there was such a rush to make sure that F1 wasn't left behind by what the automotive industry would have.
I mean, this frenzy of everything must be electric, and it doesn't. That's not gone. Electrification still has its value, but it's not total.
Yeah, that it basically over committed to it basically, and got itself tethered to this thing that it needed to. It had to be based around. And then has spent years trying to kind of make something work. And then unsurprisingly, as we've seen in 2026, it hasn't worked perfectly. There's been lots of controversy and division over it and blah, blah, blah. So I think the main thing is just to from an F1 side is to be sensible in terms of what the trends look like they are now, but then don't overcommit to it, because what we can always do in 2030 or 2031, which are the years that Ben Sulayem is talking about, and that fits in with the target for the new regulation cycle, is if we get to that point and F1 is working towards, let's say, for example, a majority internal combustion engine that is a V8 married to an MGUK or another, whatever they want to come up with. Maybe they think the MGUH needs to come back, whatever. I don't think it will. Probably just be a simple K. Whether that's producing 20 or 25% or 30% of the total power output, which is the ratio I suspect that it'll be ended up with, you can always tinker from there, because I think if you do that sensibly, you're not going to completely change the framework of your rules, your cars, and so on and so forth, if you need a few extra percent, or if electrification it's not going to disappear, that's still going to be a key part, I am sure. If that fades away, if another technology comes to the fore where by the mid-2030s, for example, because F1 is always, and the FIA are always thinking, like almost like 2 cycles at a time, just to have it in the back of your mind. There's working groups and all this going on. You're not wedded to something so much that you then can't do quite a big pivot if something big comes out before. So it makes sense to be working kind of hand in hand with the automotive manufacturers that are involved in F1, and maybe ones that are serious about potentially getting involved in the future, and using that to kind of gauge what the relevancy might be. But I don't think F1 should be beholden to road relevancy, and I definitely don't think it should be positioning itself in a way that shows, look how innovative you can be, and then trying to set trends that the automotive industry then wants to follow. It just needs to be relevant enough that enough manufacturers with the right agendas want to be part of it. I don't think it should be chasing them, certainly.
And that cost-cutting and financial sustainability is a big part of it, isn't it, John? So there seems to be some general support in F1 for this broad direction. The devil's always in the detail, but that direction of travel, FOM, Stefano Domenicali's on board with it. Some of the manufacturers, or at least some of the manufacturer teams, are certainly on board with it.
Yeah, I think it's quite simple. F1 still operates for manufacturers, win on Sunday, sell on Monday. It's about selling your product. And if you're going to invest hundreds of millions of dollars in a product to sell more cars, that has to be justifiable to the road car company. That has to go just beyond pure sponsorship terms and marketing. There's got to be technical aspects and some relevance. There is a link between the road car they want to sell to us on the Monday and what we see on the racetrack on a Sunday. And F1 needs, I think, manufacturers involved, because if there's no engines and you're beholden on a customer company that hasn't got particularly big marketing budgets or isn't getting the eyeballs of F1 all around the world, the whole sport becomes much smaller. So there is a need for both aspects, but whether it's a V8 or a turbo V6 internal combustion engine, I think primarily doesn't make much difference to manufacturers. I think neither are particularly stronger or worse off in terms of the automotive industry. But what is important, I think, is retaining that electrical element, so there is a relevance there, and it is a technology that will be future. As Toto Wolff said on Sunday, it would be ridiculous if F1 got rid of the battery element completely in 2030 or 2031. So the key area of debate, I think, is purely how big that battery is. Do we go down to 80 kilowatts, for example, and go back to what it was in the first years of KERS? Is it 150 kilowatts? Is it 300, or are we going to go down the route? Toto's talk of a mega engine with, was it 800 horsepower ICE and 400 horsepower of electrical energy, and it's the most powerful engine we have in F1 history. There's a lot of discussion, debate to be had.
I wouldn't mind that bin lorry that's outside going electric. I don't know if that's coming up for those of you listening.
I was just about to say, I hope it's as powerful as the garbage truck that's just pulled up outside. As John was working through his answer there, I did become very aware that we left the little screen door out to the patio open, so the noise was just getting progressively louder and louder. So it might not have been picked up at all, and we just sound like lunatics right now, but that is what happened if anybody picked up the noise from the background.
And if it was, we've made it a feature, not a bug of this podcast. So great, that's a win. Right, let's move on now to a question. There go the bottles now as well. I think we'll keep pushing on. We could pause, and through the magic of editing, it's suddenly. But I think we'll go with it. We'll We'll see how we get on. John, we've got a question from Caleb S. Does the feedback on the changes to the regulations from the drivers match the revolutionary tone I was hearing from David Coulthard on the broadcast? It's his responsibility to sell the action, so I don't blame him. Just trying to understand if the driver's tone has dramatically shifted. Wondering what DC's been saying.
Yeah, I don't know what DC said. I would suspect what this means is he was talking about how great the action was. Yeah, the race was good. It looked impressive. Qualifying was better, yes. But when you start speaking to drivers, there's still not unease about the regulations, but they've not delivered the full answer. There's still some question marks about aspects. There's still some weirdness. I think Scott can talk. Ocon gave a very interesting answer about attacking corners. Qualifying still not totally flat out. There's still some weird quirks we're seeing. This season every race has thrown up a quirk for us that we've uncovered about the regulations. In China, for example, we had Leclerc's power limited pending issue with Charles Leclerc spent qualifying. Japan, we had the Mercedes Red Bull qualifying trick that emerged when they were shutting down the K. Miami was about outlap preparation and just the madness of what drivers have to do on outlaps to get deployment involving throttle positions, boost pressures, deployment, battery pack, all these sort of elements which cost Norris in main qualifying on Sunday. It cost Kimi Antonelli pole position in sprint qualifying on Friday. So there's a lot of weirdness still with these regulations that drivers want to address. So I think there's a step, and Carlos Sainz was quite open actually in the media pen when we spoke to him. He said, I don't want to stand here criticising everything because it's not constructive. I want to make changes, but it's important we make changes, and it's important the changes go more than just tinkering numbers. We need some hardware changes. We need the manufacturers to wake up that things need to be moved on more than we've got right now.
I think what we will see now, because we should point out as well that Miami was always likely to be better just because of the charging opportunities here and where you would be deploying. So let's see what it's like when we go to Canada, to Spain, Monaco. It will be nice and lovely there in terms of doing everything you need to do to charge the battery and running out of places where you can deploy it. Red Bull Ring will be difficult, for example. Silverstone, I think, could be really difficult in places. So let's see over multiple races. I think what we have seen in Miami is a reduction in the extremities, which is great because that's kind of what we were aiming for. I think we've seen a bit of an elimination of some of the weirdest things or the most anomalous things that the drivers disliked. But I think what's left is ultimately the restrictions that come with a set of rules like this, because there are certain things that you will just not get away with unless some of the more, first of all, obviously, unless the architecture changes, which isn't going to happen, unless there are much bigger changes to how much of the electric power you can actually use, because that's the only way to really make the energy last across the lap and not have to do silly things in silly places to make it last, or a massive simplification of the regulations in terms of when power kicks in or when it doesn't or whatever, and just embrace whatever unknown consequences could be from that, which I don't think the FAA will do. And the reason I make that point is the thing that you said about what Ocon said, Max Verstappen said it as well. Ultimately, there's a version of these cars in certain parts of the track where simply driving them worse makes you faster over the course of the lap. And the example Ocon gave is during the opening sector where you have the sweeps where different parts of the corner, lefts and rights, lead into others, and then a short straight. Traditionally, conventionally, properly, the way that you drive, you should basically sacrifice a bit of entry to give yourself the best run off the corner possible. You want your minimum speed through the corner to be as high as you can be without compromising your run down the next straight. The way that these engines work, you're actually better off being slightly slower off the corner when you're on full throttle. And I think it's to do with using a bit less battery in that moment so that you've got a bit more battery to spend where you want to, and you can actually deploy it. It'll be to do with areas of the lap where you're restricted in terms of how much MGUK you can use, and therefore if you're spending battery there, you're not getting as much bang for your buck as if you were spending it in an area of the track where you can use 350 kilowatts. And these restrictions exist because of the way that we're trying to make sure speed differentials aren't as great, and that the power is being deployed at different parts of the lap. They don't like that. The drivers don't like that because it basically just means the better you drive, the slower you are over the lap. In certain circumstances, that doesn't go for every single corner. I think that's the sort of thing we'll be left with once the weirdnesses are all ironed out, which means you won't have completely satisfied drivers with this rule set. You just can't, because you can get rid of the extremities, which is good for them and better for us, but it still won't fix some of those underlying issues.
And the very fact that one of the levers being looked at to improve energy harvesting next year is to reduce downforce, because you want to make the cars trickier in the corners with longer braking and longer areas to harvest, I think says everything about this rule set, that the focus is on trying to compromise corners to try to make the cars acceptable on the straights.
There is simply not enough energy to go around, no matter how you slice and dice it. It's just always going to be the case. Right, a question from Matteo Morgan, who says, I'm finding races really hard to follow. There's a lack of storytelling visually and highlighting battles across the field. What can be done to improve the storytelling of a Grand Prix? Or is this going to be how it is for the duration of the regulations? Thomas Heckel complained of no battery graphics, and Craig89 asked if there's talk of getting the battery state of charge visible on screen, as it's hard to tell if someone has made a mistake or just has less battery. Yeah, well, I want to see the battery on screen a lot more. We did talk about that, a few conversations on that when we were at Biggin Hill the other day, at F1's base there. And yeah, there was hardly any state of charge, if any at all, that I noticed. I'm not looking at the main feed all the time, so I may have missed some, but I'd like more of that because I think that's really important. Storytelling visually can be difficult. I mean, battles across the field. There are lots of times in Miami where there were no battles across the field, and actually the hints of ones were towards the front. So at times you sort of thought, oh, they're only showing the front, but actually there wasn't a huge amount going on further back. But yeah, I think there's a lot more that can be done to improve that visual storytelling. I'd like to see the battery state of charge. I am wondering if there's a bit of sensitivity about showing that, though, John or Scott. Either of you think that they're a bit worried about being the Alonso Battery World Championship?
Yeah, I don't know if there is that, but I agree can be confusing to watch. And I think there is now an increased impetus on the coverage to show what the story is. But I think equally the difficulty is knowing what the story is, because there's so many overtaking moves that the critical ones now, you aren't sure is this a critical one or is this one where they're just swapping around a lot. And yesterday, because yesterday the Miami Grand Prix was a good one. You watch it now and you look at the story of it, it was a good Grand Prix. At the time, the yo-yo phase of the race, just because nothing particularly counts because they're shuffling around, so the excitement of the overtakes has gone down. And then I pondered, did I not particularly like at the time because the international feed missed the Antonelli on Norris narrative, because we were in the media centre, we didn't have commentary, which can make it harder. Plus we had this weird glitch on our screens that made the screen kept glitching.
It looked like about 4 times a lap on the shedding bodywork.
Every time it looked like there was debris all over the track or things were missing, which also didn't help. But then
that's my only criticism of the media centre in Miami.
So then we missed the Antonelli Norris thing was picked up really, really late because they were more focused on Lewis Hamilton's pit stop. Whereas if this had been the narrative of the story, I think it would have been a lot better. So I think it's about understanding. It's nice to watch a race and understand what's happening, the dynamics at play and how things are playing out. But I also wonder if this is, if it's not a fault of the regulations, it's just the situation in Formula One right now. You've got a Ferrari team that isn't quick enough to win races, but it's got an ability to make mega starts that can get it to the front, with rules of overtake and the yo-yo racing that can keep it in that mix for a little while until tyre deg starts playing out or the first pit stops. So you get a false picture of a race that then doesn't play out. Whereas for years and years, really, the race played out from start to finish. The narrative was quite consistent beyond, because you'd have people on 2 stops or 1 stop, so you knew what was happening. You wouldn't know how it would play out at the end, but you could tell the story of the race. Whereas now it's a bit more open. And maybe yesterday's was also confused by the weather, because I think we were all expecting chaos and the shenanigans of a wet race that didn't arrive. So I want to see more in Canada, basically, where things are at and get a better grip on where I'm at with these, enjoying these regulations or not.
I would like to see a little bit more effort made in the visuals of the broadcast to understand the impact that overtake mode's having, because What was interesting in Miami is that speaking to a few people about this, felt that there was a bit of a shift actually, and it wasn't so much about kind of what it gave you if you were trying to use it to then get past the car ahead. A couple of people felt it was actually quite useful as a way to recharge your battery, because it's so energy rich here. Like charging that extra half megajoule that you can get as a result of that, it's actually quite easy. So you could basically, I guess, drain the battery a bit more, leave yourself a bit more vulnerable, because then if once you had overtake mode, you would have the extra half megajoule that you could charge, and therefore you'd be able to get it back. And that was kind of the way that they were looking at it. So it served a slightly different function in Miami. So I don't know the way to do this, but I know I do know it comes back to what we're talking about with being able in some way to relay the state of charge story. And I know that some people might not find that particularly interesting, and it might not be the way that a lot of people want an F1 race story to be told, but it's no different to, just in principle, like just purely in terms of, is this a variable that decides the race? Yes, therefore how do we understand it? It's like if you're in a race where tyre deg is going to be absolutely critical, and you know that there's only so many laps that a tyre can do or whatever, or you're in a situation where, like in Qatar, where you have a maximum stint length imposed or something like that, a critical bit of information there is obviously how many laps have these tyres done? What compound are they on? How long do they have left? Right? If you don't have that information, you are blind to something absolutely fundamental. So we need to see the battery state of charge, and I think the overtake mode usage has been so badly told, just generally, because the drivers have been largely critical of it, so it's kind of hard to understand its value. I would like to see that come into it a little bit more, because I think we do need to understand what impact that is having on the races.
And it seems important to not neglect that, because they're trying to grow the F1 in America. There's still plenty of headroom to grow there, and American sports broadcasting has been at the cutting edge of really being quite information dense in places, and sometimes it's on the screen, you don't have to absorb it if you don't want to, but that's what that market expects. And I think it's really important that that's not neglected. Right, I've just about got time just to do a quick fire final round. So Scott, question from Dave Smith. Should F1 be concerned at how easily Pierre Gasly's car appeared to flip over? It seemed to be a fairly low speed contact, but suddenly the car's upside down. It could be much nastier at another circuit.
Not concerned overly beyond the fact that a car did end up upside down, and therefore you need to analyse it. And the FIA always does look at every single crash that happens and tries to work out kind of what was the cause there, could it have been avoided, what were the consequences, and so on. I think that's the kind of incident that ultimately you just have to accept is possible if you have open wheel racing. It's very similar to a specific type of accident that can happen in karting, which is slightly less exposed in terms of like how wheels can interlock. But if you just sort of catch at the right time, the right angle, it doesn't matter how slow you're going, beyond obviously like if it's absolute walking pace, you're just not going to turn it over. But it's just a matter of physics, like the weight distribution, the angle of attack, the speed, kind of what happens thereafter. Like it can happen. It's particularly unusual to see it happen at such slow speed, but I'm just going to just ask Esteban Gutierrez how quickly a car can get turned over if it's at low speed, because it was Gutierrez that got Pastor Maldonado, wasn't it, at turn 1 in Bahrain? So it happens. It wasn't that I saw one headline on one website that referred to it as like a horror crash, which I thought was the car went over the top. And Esteban Ocon told me it was scary to see because he was just behind it, so he was really relieved Gasly was okay.
It's always unnerving, but these cars are actually, that's not a high impact accident, that one. The car, you've got the halo and everything. Even without the halo, there's the cockpit geometries and everything to make sure. So it's actually a pretty, it's an inconvenient kind of accident, but it's not fun to go through, but you're usually pretty safe certainly at that speed.
The way I would say is, I don't know if this sounds weird or not, but like the cars are designed to have those crashes. Like that's not the kind of crash that when they put together like the safety structures and whatever, they go, we can't have that because the car won't survive it. Like it's designed for that to. The cars are designed because that possibility exists, and therefore the safety mechanisms are there to protect the driver from it. So I'm not too worried about it. I think they're more just going to want to understand, right, how did this happen, and is there anything we can learn from it? Because if there is, I'd like to know, because that sort of thing is always quite interesting.
There's always something you can learn. Right, John, Simon M says, I enjoyed the race, a definite improvement this season. My question is, in all of this weekend's F1, or last weekend's F1 I should say now, what was the point of the sprint race? This is a genuine question, not a moan.
I don't mind the sprints. They don't offend me. I mean, I do like weekends where you get a narrative of practice through, and they're much calmer. There's more downtime in the paddock. They're not as frantic. But I'd much rather have a sprint qualifying and a sprint race than a practice session. I think they are there. And you often do get good narratives from sprints when they first started. I can remember 2021, the story of Lewis and Max at Silverstone, for example, was based on the knowledge of the sprint, and that if Max Verstappen was leading into Beckett's on lap 1, the race was won. So that was the push from Lewis to get in front of Max. The McLarens at Monza, Daniel Ricciardo knew that there was the opportunity that if you can get in front, you can win there. So there have been good sprint weekends, and they have been important. And I think this was fine here. It was fascinating seeing McLaren come through qualifying, fascinating seeing them win. It's given some indicators of the overall car performance. We saw the deployment shifts of what McLaren did versus Mercedes. Doesn't matter to me. I don't think I'd want every race to be a sprint, but some of them absolutely fine.
I guess the heart of that question was that basically once it started, nothing really happened. They all just drove around in the same position, really. That's probably what that was getting at, wasn't it? But that's going to be the case, as I've often said before, and I don't want it to be misinterpreted because I probably did a bad job of explaining it the first time. Sometimes racing is about a lot of cars driving around and nothing happening in terms of overtakes. That can be what happens when racing happens.
Yeah, and I'm still very keen for more to be made of the sprints, alternative formats, that kind of thing. And I think F1 will get to that point eventually. Right, the final question from Kevin Henderson I'll take. Has Williams' set of upgrades put them in a good position for further weight reductions when back in Europe? Well, they're going to need further weight reductions, aren't they? Because they've taken a step, but it's going to take time. I think that's the message from Williams, and we're not just going to get to Europe and then suddenly they'll be on or actually under as they want to be the weight limit. This is a long old process, and that's all about balancing up your resources because you need to develop aerodynamically as well. So good step for Williams, but the weight story is going to be there for quite some time. Anyway, thanks very much, Scott and John. Thanks to everybody who sent in their questions. Remember, sign up for the Race Members Club if you're interested in joining the questions that we always have. We get loads of them. We try and get through as many as we can, and we really appreciate the contributions. So again, hit the link in the episode description or head to Patreon and search for the Race Members Club to find out more. But until then, we're going to keep talking about Formula One, so stay with us for everything you need to know from the world of Formula One.